Hey Tommy, what did Mario say when he broke up with Princess Peach?
Oh no, what did he say?
He said, "It's not you, it's a me, Mario."
I should have seen that coming. I should have seen that coming. Video game relevant. I see it first. I was like, this isn't a leftist joke. What are we doing here? No, it's video game relevant.
I think
Ooh.
we fully tapped the well of at least tolerable leftist jokes. And I actually,
Unfortunately.
side note, not to take us on a tangent here, but you know how everyone's kind of like, um, there's been like this kind of furor over Chat GPT. I don't know if you've seen that or not. But I actually did pull up Chat GPT and try to get it to make leftist jokes, but it's very, very bad at telling jokes. It's amazing at a lot of things, but it cannot do humor. It was just like what did the communists say to the capitalists? Viva la revolucion. You know, it was like not jokes. They're just like things like, yeah,
Yeah, like Seinfeld jokes.
sorta,
I
but
will take
worse somehow.
I will take us on a tangent, but it's video game related because you said that you were going to start playing Star Trek Online, and neither of us were going to get paid by Star Trek Online. But I'm going to talk about Star Trek Online anyways because it has consumed me as a parent. Um, I've played through most of the free point of playing. Like, in other words, like up until okay, I don't get free ships anymore. Okay, well, fuck you. I quit this like this line. So I did the Federation up until I stopped getting free ships. I did the Klingons until I stopped getting up to free ships. But in both of them, like the storyline, very meh. Like I'm just really here to blow things up. I'm not paying attention to the story. I started the Romulan arc, and let me tell you what, the Romulan arc is incredible. And okay, this is relevant to our podcast, and I'm going to try to be as quick as I can about it. Both the okay, so the Federation arc, like the whole time you're playing the Federation, you're very like aware that you're playing the neoliberals. Like even the game seems kind of aware you're playing the neoliberals. And I'll get to that in a second. And then when you play the Klingons, it's like, okay, they're more fun and they drink a lot, but like also it's an empire and like you're ruling by conquest and doing some like sticky shit too. Then playing the Romulans, you're thrown in as a Romulan refugee after the destruction of Romulus, and like the space CIA shows up with some other aliens that they're paying money because the space CIA doesn't do their own dirty work and starts fucking up your like refugee camp. And so you just like take an old retired Romulan warbird and fuck their shit up. And then the like the first world powers of the galaxy are like competing for like to have you like ally with one side or the other. And like okay, so there's a
Hmm.
speech that I get from a Federation diplomat as they're trying to get me to ally with the Federation. That is so like the game knows what it's doing because this diplomat is asking me how I feel about like the CIA doing dirty shit to my people. And every time I try to answer, he just interrupts me with what he thinks I'm going to say because he doesn't see me as a human being. He sees me as a Romulan and doesn't actually like care or think he needs to care what my outlook is on my own situation. And I'm just like, it is such a good interpretation of like, because the Federation is basically the United Nations, and it is just such a good interpretation of like the United Nations being kind of an instrument of colonialization. God, I just love it. The Romulan arc.
Interesting.
It's
Yeah.
the shit. Play the Romulan arc. Sorry,
It's
that was my
it.
tangent.
Well, maybe we'll have a Star Trek episode sometime because, like, I think there's something interesting also about the evolution of like the narrative function of the Federation across the history of Star Trek has changed a lot. You know, like it was initially supposed to be this sort of like ideal, sort of utopian sort of thing, and it has morphed a lot to be more complicated than that. Uh, so anyway, so what we're really here to talk about though is video games. In case you forgot, this started on talking about Star Trek Online, not just Star Trek in general. And previously we had kind of gone over like some just like top level concerns about like video games in general, their potential negative effects, and then like broad principles about how to get your kids into video games and whatnot in a responsible way around and we mostly talked about ways to handle difficulty. So next up is for broad principles is emotions. So we've talked about like how to make the games more just easy to play, so that they're not being asked to do something that they're either incapable of doing or would be just like deeply frustrating to attempt or whatever. But the reality is, no matter what you do, it's going to be a challenge at some level. And video games become an opportunity to learn to handle certain kinds of emotions, usually negative, like anger or whatever, as they get frustrated by failure. So some basic, just like anger management stuff, that it's a good opportunity for you to sort of like demonstrate. So like if they start to get frustrated, you can demonstrate like taking some breaths to calm down, asking them if they feel calm enough to proceed. If they can't like sort of bring themselves down, like waiting until they can chill before returning to the game. And also like if they can't, like if it's very clear that like they're not going to chill anytime soon, you may have to switch tasks, and maybe a demonstration of like handle your anger by getting away from the stimulus. Like if they're upset, they can't or won't calm down, you may have to just sort of step in and be your child's prefrontal cortex for a second and say, hey, okay, we're going to switch tasks. We're going to done playing. Oftentimes, in my experience, that will initially make them significantly more upset because they'll be very frustrated that they're feeling like they're being punished for not succeeding at the game or getting upset. But, you just kind of explain to them, this is not a punishment. You're not in trouble, but it's just a good idea when we get upset and we can't calm down to do something else for a little bit. And, I would say also try to explain, and this is a more like slightly more nuanced point. So like you have to meet them where they're at as far as like level of development and age. But like try to explain like, we're playing a game. The point is to have fun and to, possibly also to meet a challenge of some kind. And like, if you're upset, you're not going to be good at meeting that challenge. Your frustration is going to cause you to make rash decisions or just be more sort of like overreactive to things, which can lead you to overcorrect and, just make more mistakes in general. And so like, if you're not able to calm down, it's obvious that the fun of the game is not outpacing the negative experience. So it's time to take a break.
Yeah, and I think this is a wonderful example of like kind of one of those core things, like core example of what it means to be a parent. Like this is a parenting opportunity as much as that term is overused, because in my opinion, at least, an important role as a parent is to be that temporary prefrontal cortex, to know, okay, there's this kind of system of how to deal with our brain that we as adults have learned and we've developed, and we know, okay, when I get to this point of this game, I need to step away and do something else. I need to switch tasks because I'm getting worse at it and this is no longer fun for me. And that also like that goes throughout like a bunch of other things in our life, right? In order to be productive, we need to know, okay, I need to stop focusing on this task. I need to just, you know what? This isn't working for me. I'm going to step away from this and go to something else. I'll come back to this. That's something we've learned because we're adults, and it took us a long time to learn that. Kids haven't learned that yet. We both need to teach it to them, but we also need to step in and be that like decision making structure, because they don't have that decision making structure yet, because you have to build that decision making structure, if that makes sense. Like that's not
it's by far the biggest challenge as a parent is to like figure out like both like give, because that's intention, you know, sort of in the dialectical sense, right? Like it's intention with the desire to have your kids have free will to be able to do things that they want to do and make their own choices and learn to manage and experience the consequences of those things. Like is like the whole, to me it's this like tug and pull, right? Like on the one hand you gotta um have your kids like learn to make their own decisions, but on the other hand sometimes the decisions they make are really bad. uh and you kind of have to evaluate, are the consequences of that bad decision negative enough for me to insert myself in here and say like, you're done, you know, we're moving on, you're doing something else, you're getting off your computer or whatever. And it's not a task that like I don't want to trivialize it. Like it's not like you just find the right line in the sand, you draw it, and you're like, there you go, there's the line that we've drawn, that's the objectively correct like time to step in. It's always a changing, moving target and very circumstantial, and you'll miss a lot as a result, because you'll learn, oh, it's about at this point, and then you'll do it then and it'll be wrong for some reason, you know. And you'll just have to, and it will be wrong in part because they'll develop and grow and they'll get better at it, and you'll have, your last memory is when they were younger and worse at it, and you gotta constantly be going like, okay, I gotta reevaluate, okay, I gotta reevaluate. It's a really, really hard thing, and especially in any area where you struggle yourself with that thing. Like for example, like I have ADHD. A component of that is difficulty with emotional regulation. It's hard for me to get myself to stop playing games when I get upset with them. I get frustrated that I lost. I'm like immediately click the like next game thing. I'm gonna get in there. I'm just gonna wreck some idiots this next game, whatever. And like you can get into a ugly spiral with that. And it's hard. And so it can be a struggle for me to do that appropriately for my kids, because I can't even do it appropriately for myself 100% of the time. Medication helps with that, obviously, but yeah, it's a tough thing.
Yeah. So handling content.
Right. Yeah. So that's the sort of last like broad strategy thing that I wanted to talk about, is like, obviously, you know, it kind of depends on what game you're playing, but there's a handful of types of content that are in games that we might be concerned about. So I'm going to talk about the like most obvious two that I can almost 100% guarantee the minute we talk about content in video games that may not be appropriate for kids, everyone goes like, okay, we got violence and we got sex, so let's go. Violence is obviously a feature of just an overwhelming majority of video games. And so like, you're not really realistically, unless you're going to be like hyper strict with like curating a specific list, getting games that have no violence in them whatsoever. And they're just going to find games that they're interested in that contain violent of some kind. You know, it may be like Roblox, where like the thing like falls into little pieces or whatever, but like it's still a kind of violence. And so like my sort of thought with this, and this is just kind of my take, is that I try to find games that I think they'll enjoy that also don't treat violence as uncomplicatedly good. Like a ton of like RPGs are like, you're the heroes, you go out, goblins appear, you kill them because that's what you're supposed to do. And you're good for doing it. They're monsters, they're bad. And not to say that I get games that are like that are just like inherently wrong, more just like what I like to do is kind of like inject some like, you know, I wonder how the goblins feel about people randomly showing up in their forest and killing a bunch of them. You know, like you can inject it like that by just asking pointed questions, or in, you know, if you can find a game that has this, has a more nuanced sort of take on it, it can be really helpful. For example, I got both my kids to play through Undertale, and I'll try to say this without like any spoilers, although like at this point, that game's old enough that maybe the spoiler window is fair to just ignore. But uh, Undertale, I sort of they, I think the tagline for it is even something like the RPG where you don't have to hurt anyone, or something like it. They make it pretty prominent that like violence is complicated in Undertale. You can still do it. And in fact, in some ways, the game design kind of encourages you to do it a little bit, but also admonishes you then for doing so. So like it immediately kind of introduces this idea of like, oh, maybe try not to be, violent or whatever. And then when you do, it starts presenting you with consequences for that. Like people come in, they're like, I saw you kill this person, and so now I have to stop you. Or like characters that like you'll like I remember one of my kids killed one of the monsters and then found another monster that looked like it, and it was like, oh, I'm just waiting for my friend to come. We always meet here and get coffee or whatever. And it was like, that was a moment that like he like felt bad. He was like, oh, I killed that monster and now he's gone and he had a friend, and this one's not mean. Like so like, and they handled it pretty well, like understanding that sort of like nuance of like, no, yeah, like you get rid of someone and they're gone, type of thing. And so I highly recommend Undertale. Obviously, you know, um, in my case, like I played it with them, so like I helped them like read the dialogue and understand what was happening in the game. But I think Undertale is an excellent game to sort of handle violence in a more nuanced manner than a lot of video games, which is just like kill the red things and get lots of points.
Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic is a game that comes to my mind with this, where it had a system for, of course, like doing good and bad things would, affect your like allegiance in the Force, whether you were a light side user or dark side user, and then would change the overall like story arc of the game. But also the thing for me was that it taught me in the game real quickly, in just the way that it was structured, like the things that you could put your skills into. Putting my skills into talking my way out of situations, into charisma and persuasiveness, was way easier than fighting my way out of situations. So as a kid, like I learned pretty quickly, like, oh, it's easier if I use some, like not without, I wasn't even thinking of like, oh, I want to be like less violent in this game. It was just, man, it's a lot easier to get to some of these scenes if I can get everyone to stop shooting at me before they ever start shooting at me. So I should get good at persuasiveness and charisma. And that was just, I think, a very valuable kind of thing to learn as a kid playing a game, was like, hey, sometimes talking your way out of situations is better than shooting your way out of situations.
For sure, for sure. So the other type of content that we obviously are most often concerned with, just in general across all parents, is sex/romance. People have different feelings about what points is like. I mean, some parents will add romance to their kids' perception from the minute they make a friend that's of the opposite sex. Not sure I'm a fan of that, but like, point being like, but we all pretty much agree that with kids, sex is a thing to wait until they're older to introduce that kind of content. So like, obviously as a baseline, if a game has sexual content, consider the age of your children. Don't show a game with explicit content to your 5-year-old. Hopefully that goes without saying, but I said it anyway. So also importantly, like, don't let video games be your child's sex ed. Like, if that's where your kids are learning about it, it's probably not going to be a very good lesson. Just put it that way. Even games that are like, that could be like sex positive, or what you would otherwise think of them in some kind of sense of like being more progressive or whatever. It's just like not how they should find out about that. They should find out about it from you, where they have a chance to ask questions and, you know, explore the idea with someone that they trust and who can help them understand what they need to understand. So, I mean, I don't think anyone's, I hope, using video games as a replacement for sex ed, but I'm never surprised by some people. So,
So my initial reaction was actually as primarily a console gamer. My initial reaction was like, what games have sex in them other than Grand Theft Auto? And that's just like barely even that. But actually, no, there's like a lot of online and computer games that are like dating simulators. But I think especially when we're talking about like middle school kids, like middle school age kids, like I got into some like, as a bored kid in a rural area at 13, like I got into like some dating simulator type games when I was a kid. They were like text only back then, and it was like, you would explore certain, if you ever played text based games where it would like you would explore rooms and then you'd have interactions and conversations with characters in the game, and then they would like respond based on how you like on how your responses were. Anyways, it's really bad for your kids to like learn human interaction in that way because it's gamified. Like romantic relationships shouldn't be gamified from your understanding of them. That needs to be introduced in a different way.
yeah,
Even
you
games
really
that are
don't want your boys, especially, like learning that like the correct thing, like all you got to do is find the right thing to say, and once you say the right thing, then you get the relationship or you get the gratification or whatever. Like that's a huge problem with like toxic masculinity that
mm-hmm.
like I won't say is like I'll be generous at least to say like when you're talking about making some kind of like dating sim or whatever, like there's no other way to do it, sort of, because like freeform text requires a lot, natural language processing really hard anyway. uh like I get why dating sims are like that, but it teaches a bad lesson. uh so yeah, don't surrender the sex ed of your children to video games or anything
Yes.
else. um so I'll also talk a little bit about like romance, um because romantic elements can be a good opportunity to teach sort of like emotional intelligence. So like you know like for example, I'll go back to Undertale. In Undertale there's some romantic subplots between then actually some of the NPCs, and throughout the game there's tiny hints where if you're paying attention to their behavior and how they act and what their expressions are, you can notice that kind of thing before the game is very explicit about like I want to date this person, that's how I feel, uh and so like you can, if you, especially if you know the content of the game ahead of time, you can sort of like point out like, oh hey look, this person's like getting sweaty, or like seems really nervous when they're being asked about that kind of thing. I wonder why that is. Like, get them to sort of like wonder why someone might behave in this way when they're in this situation. And then as a side note, just it's just good in general if you could find some games that have like just normalized LGBTQ relationships, not fetishized ones, like none of this like especially like lesbian fetishism can be a problem in some video games. So don't let your kids' first introduction to LGBTQ relationships be male gaze fetishized lesbianism. That's not good. I hope it goes without saying, but yeah, try to find some things, and that's a lot more common now. It's a lot easier to find that kind of stuff now in games and especially in like shows and stuff, but than it used to be. But yeah.
This next topic is one that, oh boy, this is the one that I worry the most about. Because my biggest fear is partly because I have a military fixation. This giant pirate ship behind me, which some might not think of as militaristic, but it has cannons on it. Over to the other sides of me, where you can't actually see, there are all kinds of starfighters behind me, which are fighter craft. They are militaristic. I really kind of wanted to join the military just because I was really obsessed with militaristic stuff as a kid. Um, I don't want my son to want to do that. And games push this so hard.
Right. So the last sort of like category here, third category, is sort of it's broad and a little bit more abstract. So stick with me here. It's pushing back on hegemonic ideology. So this is like the pushing on the edge of what, I think society in general might just like treat as normal or given. I think Call of Duty is perhaps like the worst example of this, in that like it's more or less military propaganda. Like it just sort of treats as normal. Soldiers are the good guys. You play them and you kill the bad guys who are terrorists, who are usually brown people. And you just like accept that as a game mechanic, or like at least a game aesthetic. Like, so I won't go into a billion examples. Hegemonic ideology is everywhere, constantly, all the time. It's everything that we consider normal and don't think about it on a daily basis. So like, what I will say about this, without just listing off a bunch of examples and just like ways that I pushed back or whatever, I'll just say like more in general, right? Like be aware of what kind of things are hegemonic, and like try to insert as you can some pushback on that. Like notice it, have them notice it, see that it's, that it's a thing that's there, and that they can question it, and it is okay. And there are some good questions to ask here, but like, don't be obnoxious about it, right? Because it's everywhere. It's everywhere all the time. And if you're interrupting their gameplay every 2 to 3 minutes to make a social critique, that's really annoying. And they're going to learn, well, when I play video games, dad just lectures me a bunch, right? Like, so like, don't be obnoxious, essentially. Like, give a little pushback, try to see if they're sort of getting it, and move on. I think you do this with television shows too. I certainly do. I've gotten my 9-year-old now is to the point that he kind of does it on his own. And so now I'm having to teach him the opposite lesson, which is like another part of this like dialectical thing with parenting, is like you're constantly teaching your kids models that are like simplified down to their level of understanding, and then having to unteach them those models because they're actually not very good. So like, you teach him to like critique the media, and now he does it constantly, and have to be like, bud, okay, it's really annoying when you interrupt the movie every 2 minutes to point out some social critique that you're noticing. Like, please stop. And
do this internally.
right. And it's fine to do it occasionally, but like there's a balance, and you got to find that balance. And it's a thing he's learning right now. So, I would say just like I would look for particularly poignant moments, like where the example is like very clear, and you can sort of like really tease out like, oh, like why are they assuming this is just like the way things are? Why are they just like, why are they saying like this is for women? Or if this character is saying like boys are like this, like, oh really, are boys like that all the time? Are you like that? Like, I just kind of ask like, what do they mean by that? And ask them, is that true? You can have a brief discussion or whatever if they're internet. Sometimes they might be like, I don't know, and if they're getting frustrated, or if they're not really understanding it, you can move on. It doesn't have to be like we're gonna do critical thinking, critical theory type of like constantly, like especially like at a certain developmental ages, they're just not ready to like fully think about that sort of thing. But like, at least plant the seed, keep watering it occasionally in a way that's not obnoxious and constant, and they'll get it. Eventually they'll get the idea of like noticing normal things and going, does it have to be like that? Uh, and once they kind of get that concept, you can kind of back off of this. And like, honestly, at least in my experience, they'll kind of start doing it on their own to a point. Like I said a second ago, that's too much. And then you have to teach them to not be annoying to everyone else. And that's the next challenge.
But I mean, and that's the case for everybody as we, get introduced to this kind of stuff, and it's like that's part of the learning process. Like, um, there's a whole conversation about like organizing workplaces and how you can't organize a workplace if every single conversation you have with your coworkers is about how you're about to organize the workplace. Like everybody's just going to be driven fucking nuts by you. You've got to be chill and be able to talk about normal shit too. If this is your only life. Um, so I feel like this, yeah, I think we should go ahead and wrap it up here and then just do a third episode. So I feel like this is maybe a good time for us to go ahead and leave this for a part three. This is stretched into a three, or maybe I think our first three-parter episode. Um, you're on mute.
I think we had one, but that might have been molding masculinity that I'm remembering. So, yeah, so I'll say that's kind of the broad strategies of like handling the video games from different angles. So like now the sort of like last part that we'll do next time is a segment where we'll go through different genres of games, real-time strategy or turn-based strategy games, role-playing games, platformers, fighting games, and just kind of talk about some of the details around this. And hopefully we can get through those in a single in one more episode. There's a lot to go over, but hopefully they're sort of like little one-off things. And so yeah, we'll talk about specifics. So if you're wondering like this is cool, but like how do I introduce my 7-year-old to platformers that keep falling off and dying, we'll have some kind of points to make about that. So
Yeah, and I mean, I'm excited to hear about some of this just for myself because I was 30 years old when I finally got into platformers for the first time because I always just found them really frustrating.
Yeah, my very first game was Sonic the Hedgehog. So like platformers were like a core part of my early video game experience. That's really interesting.
Well, where might people find us on the internet?
Well, you can find us anywhere that podcasts are found. And if you're seeing our faces right now, that means you're on YouTube, which means that you should click subscribe and ring the notification bell so that you are always told when we have a new episode out. And for anyone listening, if you really like our podcast and you want to support us financially so that we can make it better, then you can find us at patreon.com/raisemleft. And if you do subscribe to the Patreon, we have a Discord community where we can chat about all kinds of stuff, like what kinds of video games that you're sharing with your kids right now. I'd love to hear from people about like what kinds of like game recommendations and whatnot. I certainly, in the research for this episode, did a bunch of research into like what are good games to play with your kids or whatnot. And so I'd love to hear people's thoughts about that kind of thing. But yeah, check us out there, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you all for joining us. Have a wonderful morning, afternoon, evening, or whatever other time of day it is. Bye.